In recent hours, a significant legal development has sent shockwaves through political and economic circles across the United States, one that could reshape the way presidential authority is understood in the realm of trade and taxation. A federal appeals court has delivered a decisive ruling against the sweeping tariffs imposed by former President Donald Trump, declaring them unlawful and invalid. This outcome is being described by many not only as a blow to Trump's economic agenda, but also as an important victory for the Constitution and for the foundational principle that no president can unilaterally impose taxes on the American people. To understand the significance of this moment, it is essential to unpack what led here, why the ruling matters, and what it means going forward for both the economy and the balance of power in American governance. From the very beginning of his presidency, Donald Trump placed tariffs at the heart of his economic policy. He repeatedly imposed them on goods coming from countries like China, Mexico, and Canada, presenting the measures as a way to protect American workers and industries from what he described as unfair trade practices. Yet, for all the political showmanship, these tariffs quickly became both economically controversial and legally suspect. They were widely unpopular among economists, business leaders, and consumers, with polls consistently showing strong disapproval. For ordinary Americans, the costs were immediate and visible. Tariffs operate as taxes on imported goods, meaning that prices on a wide range of everyday products shot upward. From electronics to household goods to groceries, consumers were effectively footing the bill for these executive decisions. The economic pain was not limited to shoppers. Corporations and small businesses alike reported billions in losses. Tariffs meant higher costs for raw materials and products, which cut into profit margins and forced many companies to either raise prices or reduce hiring and investment. At the same time, the tariffs contributed to higher inflation, making it harder for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates and stabilize the economy. Analysts calculated that the total costs reached into the hundreds of billions of dollars, all borne by Americans rather than foreign nations. For this reason alone, critics argued that the tariffs were reckless economic policy. But what made them even more problematic was their shaky legal foundation. The question that stood at the center of the legal challenge was simple yet profound. Could the president, acting alone, impose tariffs that raised such vast sums of money without congressional approval? The Constitution in Article I, Section 8, grants Congress, not the president, the power to impose tariffs and taxes. The founders were explicit about this point, designing the separation of powers to ensure that taxation would always require representation through elected legislators. After all, the American Revolution itself had been fought on the principle of no taxation without representation. Yet Trump's actions appeared to defy that principle directly. When his administration attempted to defend the tariffs in court, officials leaned on a 1977 law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This law was designed to give presidents emergency authority to impose sanctions on foreign adversaries in cases of national security threats. However, nowhere in the statute does the word tariff appear, nor was it ever intended to grant presidents the unilateral authority to restructure America's entire trade policy. In fact, no president in the 50 years since the law's passage had ever interpreted it as permitting tariffs. Even Donald Trump himself initially recognized that he lacked this power. During his first term, he went to Congress seeking authority to impose tariffs, but lawmakers declined. It was only later that he chose to bypass Congress and claim that emergency powers allowed him to act on his own. When the matter first went to a district court, the judge rejected Trump's defense, ruling that the tariffs had no basis in law. The Department of Justice, representing the administration, quickly appealed. That set the stage for this week's dramatic decision by the Federal Appellate Circuit, which upheld the lower court's ruling in a 7-4 vote. In clear terms, the judges concluded that the tariffs were illegal and unconstitutional. They described Trump's executive orders as attempting to impose taxes of unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world, an assertion of power as sweeping as any president could attempt. The court stated bluntly that there was no clear congressional authorization for such actions, and that stretching statutory language to justify them was a wafer, thin excuse on which to rest such sweeping authority. For Neil Ketchell, the attorney who argued the case on behalf of a coalition of small businesses, The decision was a resounding affirmation of constitutional limits. Katyal, a former acting Solicitor General of the United States, explained that the ruling was not just a setback for a former president, but a win for the rule of law. He emphasized that challenging presidential action is always a serious and careful undertaking, but in this instance, the overreach was so blatant that it left no choice. The founders deliberately placed tariff authority with Congress, and when Trump decided to act without it, he crossed a constitutional line. The court's decision also resonated because it touched on broader questions about executive power. In recent years, the Supreme Court itself has signaled unease with presidents of either party making major decisions unilaterally. Justices have suggested in multiple rulings that issues of significant national impact must be decided by Congress, not by executive decree. Tariffs that amount to the largest tax increase on Americans since the early 1990s certainly fall into that category. According to the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, Trump's measures represented a bigger financial burden than any tax increase since the Clinton administration in 1993. Yet Congress played no role in approving them. For many Americans, the impact of the tariffs was felt in everyday life. Consider something as simple as coffee. The United States produces very little coffee domestically, with only small amounts grown in Hawaii. Almost all the coffee consumed nationwide is imported, and under Trump's policy, those imports were tariffed. As a result, coffee prices rose sharply, hitting consumers at their morning breakfast tables. The same pattern repeated across countless goods, from food staples to manufactured items, demonstrating how the tariffs functioned as a hidden tax on ordinary households. By affirming that these tariffs were unlawful, that the appellate court not only addressed the economic consequences, but also underscored the importance of adhering to constitutional limits. If a president could simply declare an emergency and impose tariffs indefinitely, there would be no meaningful check on executive power. That, the court emphasized, is not how the American system is designed to function. Looking ahead, the Trump team is widely expected to appeal to the Supreme Court. Legal experts anticipate that the justices will take up the case, given its significance in defining presidential powers. While some observers worry that the court, with its conservative majority, may be sympathetic to Trump, others note that the justices have repeatedly ruled against executive overreach, even when it came from a Republican administration. Kyle himself expressed confidence in the merits of the case, arguing that this is not a partisan victory, but a bipartisan affirmation of constitutional principles. In his view, conservatives and liberals alike should celebrate the outcome because it reinforces the rule of law. It is also worth noting that the coalition supporting the challenge was broad and included conservative legal thinkers and organizations such as the Liberty Justice Center. This was not a purely liberal effort to restrain Trump, but rather a recognition across ideological lines that the Constitution must remain the guiding framework. The involvement of prominent conservative figures underscored that defending congressional authority over taxation is not a left or right issue, but a fundamental matter of American governance. The ruling also invites reflection on history. One of the central grievances that led to the American Revolution was taxation imposed by King George III without representation in Parliament. The founders designed the new Constitution specifically to prevent such unilateral taxation by an executive. By rejecting Trump's tariffs, the appeals court reinforced this historical lesson: no president, regardless of party, can claim the authority to tax the people without the consent of their representatives. Still, political fallout has already begun. Allies of Trump have reacted angrily, with some framing the decision as an act of judicial overreach. Former advisor Stephen Miller took to social media to describe the ruling as a judicial coup, reflecting the broader narrative among Trump loyalists that courts and institutions are unfairly targeting him. Yet such rhetoric does little to change the legal reality. The appellate court has spoken, and unless overturned by the Supreme Court, the tariffs are legally void. For now, the decision stands as one of the most consequential checks on presidential power in recent memory. It signals that even in an era of polarized politics, there remain clear constitutional boundaries that cannot be ignored. Whether or not the Supreme Court ultimately weighs in, the case has already underscored a vital principle. In the United States, no single person holds the power to tax the people. That authority rests, as it always has, with Congress. As the legal battle moves forward, Americans will continue to feel the economic reverberations of the tariffs already imposed. But they can also take some reassurance that the courts remain willing to enforce the Constitution and protect the balance of powers. In the end, this ruling is about more than trade policy. It is about reaffirming the basic structure of American democracy and ensuring that the lessons of history are not forgotten.